Welcome everyone to the Friends of the DAO Star Party for August 7th, 2021. It's going to be a good night for everyone tonight. First, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish and the Kwanghan-speaking peoples, who are the custodians of these lands and waters. This area has long been the gathering place of the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and Saanich nations, long before the arrivals of the Europeans. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live, work, collaborate, and learn here, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in the ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the British Columbia community. We invite all attendees tonight to reflect on the relationships you have to the communities that inhabit this land and share the night sky in wonder. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm just going to go over the agenda for tonight. So coming up after announcements is What's Up in the Sky with Dawn. And then following that, Dorothy Paul, Dr. Dorothy Paul is going to be giving a talk on prospecting for life here and elsewhere, followed by some space and astronomy news, and then our Ask an Astronomer segment, which will be hosted by Ruhi, John Mohammed, and Sid Sidhu. And finally, we've got electronically assisted astronomy with David, Brandy, and Mike, I believe. If you're watching us on YouTube, please give us a like and a subscribe. That really helps us out. You can also find us on all the social medias at FriendsDAO. We're getting close to 200 followers on Instagram, so if you can help us push it over that would be fantastic. As well, we are a membership and donation supported organization. If you'd like to get involved with either with a donation or become a sustaining member, you can visit centeroftheuniverse.org and click on the donate or membership tabs. Members get access to the Zoom chat for these star parties rather than just the YouTube. As well, we're looking for volunteers. We still don't have a firm date yet, but we're anticipating opening the center quite soon. If you'd like to be involved in that and help us get everything shipshape for welcoming the public back, we'd love to hear from you. You can also find information on that at centeroftheuniverse.org. While you're watching, if you have any questions for any of our presenters or just ruminations on astronomy, the universe, life, everything, please toss those into either the YouTube or the Zoom chat. We'd love to hear them. I'll be passing those along to our speakers, and for any more in-depth questions, we'll pass that on to our Ask an Astronomer panel later in the evening. With that, I'm going to pass things over to Dawn to tell us what's up in the sky.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I hope you're all doing well tonight. And so what's up in the sky? Well, first off, some of you are probably wondering what's behind me. I assume that you can see me on your screen. And there's clearly an observatory dome and a comet. And you can see somebody looking through a telescope at that. And this was actually taken back in 1997. I took a photo from the hilltop at the current location of the RASC's observatory, which is the old location for the 16-inch telescope that's up on the hill. And that red light that makes it look like a furnace is actually just a dim red light in this time exposure. So this is kind of a cool photo from a long time ago. But what I'm here to talk about tonight is what's up in the current sky. And so just to give you a general outline here, sunset is at 8:41 tonight with full darkness from 10:55 to 3:41 a.m. And sunrise is at 5:56 a.m. And in 2 weeks, by our next star party, sunset will be quite a bit earlier. It'll be 8:13 p.m. and sunrise will be 6:16. So we'll have approximately an extra 50 minutes of total darkness. So that's great. And right now we do have a very dark night sky when it's clear, because new moon is tomorrow, meaning that we are enjoying dark skies and cloudless evenings. And interestingly enough, on cloudy nights, you may have noticed that the sky is actually quite bright. here in Victoria. And in fact, we find that we really have to have our shades pulled when it's a cloudy night. And that may seem odd, but this is due to artificial lights being reflected off of the bottoms of the clouds. And so poorly shielded street lights, business signs, security lights, and backyard string lights, which have become popular, all contribute to this glow. But on cloudless nights, this light still affects our view because it causes air glow, and that reduces our ability to see fainter stars and objects in the nighttime sky. So that does, it's a frequently asked question of whether that affects the astronomers on the Hill. And in fact, it does. It limits certain particular wavelengths what they can do. So if you're lucky to be out camping and away from city lights, you'll certainly notice the difference over the next little while. So let's have a look at the screen here in stellarium, and you can see that Venus is about 5 degrees above the western horizon at about 9:15 tonight. And but it's probably only visible if you have the sea for a horizon. For locals, you could try a spot like the breakwater. So that's a great place to try to get a good horizon, although that's not a perfect sea horizon there either. But the crescent moon will be close to Venus in the sky on Tuesday evening if you want to try to spot it. So if you're having trouble finding it in the sky, that should give you a bit of an aid. So look to the southern part of the sky. We're going to advance the time a little bit here. And I'm going to just make it a little bit darker and get rid of the time here. That's blocking our view. And so down in the southeast, you can see that, that Jupiter is fairly low down on the horizon, but it's still quite visible, and Saturn is to its upper right. Jupiter is actually much brighter than Saturn, and you'll notice that the planets don't twinkle, and that's simply because it's imperceptible to the eye, but they have a bit of angular width, and so the little air cells that move in front of the stars and cause them to change in brightness and so on actually don't affect the planets that much because they have a bit of an angular width. So the big event in August, of course, is the Perseid meteor shower. And every year we pass through the debris left by comet Swift-Tuttle, which is what causes this. And I'm just going to advance my screen here, pardon me. And so Wednesday night is the peak for this, or I should say Thursday morning. And the reason I say Thursday morning is we always see more meteors after midnight as we're facing into the meteor stream then. And it's the same effect as driving through a snowstorm at night, and with your headlights on, you get more snowflakes hitting the front window of the car than the back, owing to the car's motion. And if you look up at the nighttime sky, that is very much like seeing snowflakes coming at you in the car's headlights. They seem to radiate from a point in the sky, and that's what we call, fittingly enough, we call the radiant. And there we see over in the northeastern part of the sky where that is, it's fairly low down on the horizon. And so probably the best thing to do is to dress really warmly and then find a spot away from city lights, as I said earlier, and stretch out on a lawn chair or a blanket or something like that in a place without a lot of trees around it, and point your feet in the direction of the northeast. So from Victoria, that would be in the direction of Vancouver. And you should give yourself at least 20 minutes for your eyes to adjust to the darkness if you want to see the fainter meteors and maximize the number of meteors that you see. And if you're lucky, after midnight, you may see up to 50 meteors per hour if you're watching in the wee hours. And some astronomers, of course, they have full days, and so they like to maybe take a nap later in the day and then wake themselves up later in the middle of the night and go out and have a look to see it at its best. But of course, if you're out camping, that's really convenient for that. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about what some cultures around the world have said about this. So many cultures have stories about, oh, I should just mention that I'm just going to advance the time here just a little bit to talk about the next subject. I want to talk a little bit about a little star cluster that's visible in the evening. And I'm actually going to back it up just a little bit. And you might notice that there's this little group of stars here, and this is actually called the Pleiades. And it's so the Maori call it the Matariki, and they think they refer to it as the eyes of one of their gods. And the first sighting of it actually begins their new year, and that's in around June, late June or July. But it was really common for people around the world to think of them as sisters. And so that's often how they're referred to in Western culture. In Australia, I'm going to see if I can get the name right here. The Wurundjeri people of Australia call them the Kataraguk, and they thought of them as sisters. But in Japan, and of course it's appropriate to think of Japan right now because the Olympics are ending tomorrow, and they actually refer to them as the Subaru. And so they refer to them as sisters. And you'll see these depicted in the Subaru car logo. But one of the odd things about that logo is that it doesn't look quite like this star cluster that's rising up in the northeastern part of the sky. If you look at the fainter stars in that logo, they look quite a bit like this star cluster, but then there's one really big star next to it. And the reasons for this is because the dominant company in this conglomerate that came together to build Subaru cars was Fuji Motor Works. And they demanded that their star be bigger than all the rest because they were the major partner in that. So it's a very unrealistic depiction of the star cluster on the car logo, but it's been like that since the 1950s. So notably, this star cluster is also the name of the Japanese National Telescope that's on Mauna Kea in Hawaii that went into operation in 1998. And I encourage you to go check that out on the web. And one of the most intriguing things on their website is a big survey of distant galaxies. And they have an image that shows about 200,000 galaxies. So I encourage you to have a look at that. And so that's about it for me. And if you have any questions about the night sky, I'm sure the astronomers later in Ask an Astronomer can answer those for you. So thank you very much for your attention.
All right, thanks so much, Don. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the Perseids this year. That's a favorite of mine. It's on my anniversary, so I always try and go out and take a look at it. But yeah, definitely giving your eyes time to adjust is really important. Like, you want to look at your phone as little as possible, and basically every time you look at your phone, you want to give yourself another 20 minutes. So if you anticipate needing to use it, like, or you want something to entertain you, like put on an audiobook or something and just lie there and listen. Just keep your head looking up at the sky. You don't have to look too closely at anything. It actually works well if you just sort of let your eyes wander. They'll sort of snap to anything that shoots across the sky. Always a great time, especially since it happens. Yeah.
I have to ask, do you have phone addiction?
A little bit. A little bit, yeah.
Like the rest of us, I guess, yeah.
Yeah. I know there are apps you can get where it'll like make your phone screen entirely red, which does help a bit with the night vision, but still, like, you want to be using screens as little as possible.
That's a great tip. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so next up, we have our feature presentation. So I'm going to turn things over to Lori to introduce our speaker.
Hi, everybody. I have the pleasure tonight of introducing Dr. Dorothy Paul, who is a longtime member of the Royal Astronomical Society here in Victoria, and has been a friend of the friends of the DAO for a long time as well. She and her husband Miles come up and set their great big telescope up sometimes up on the hill, and people always line up to see through Dorothy and Miles's telescope. Tonight, Dorothy is going to talk about, as she said, prospecting for life here, I guess, on Earth and elsewhere. And Dorothy is a neurobiologist. She has worked at UVic for a long time and retired just a little while ago. Did work in the biology department and is very well known there as a great teacher. She now spends a lot of her time doing work in astronomy, but she's also a birder and she's a gardener, and she has a tremendous wealth of knowledge of all different kinds of things. She's a great reader, and she and Miles go out when they can. I think that it was a little bit harder during the pandemic, but they go out and find dark sky sites down in the US and go camping, and they always come back with stories that are just marvelous. So tonight she is going to be speaking to us with her astrobiology hat on, and she's always really entertaining I always learn so much when she gives a talk. I come away with, I didn't know that before. So hopefully that will be the same tonight. And thanks, Dorothy, for agreeing to help us out with the Friends of the DAO, and you can take it away.
There you go.
Took me a while to get back here. I don't know why I keep losing it. And I was listening to you and the introduction. Thank you, Laurie. And I hope I get some extra minutes. Now, share screen, right?
Share screen, and then click on the presentation in the little pop-up window.
Oh, right there. This is different than it used to be. My excuse.
It's working. It looks good.
Get it full screen. Okay. Oh, come on. Just have to do a few little adjustments. I had it all set. And
Dorothy, just go to slideshow.
Yeah, is that going to work? Okay,
Yep,
so
go to slideshow.
Okay.
Just click on slideshow and then go to beginning.
Yeah, I know how to do it. Oh, this is a real bummer. I don't have my usual slideshow. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
There we go. Okay.
Looks good.
The only thing I'd like to do, mostly of what I see is all of you. Oh, here we go. Okay.
You should be able to see your own slide there. Hopefully.
Yeah, well, it's mostly, there we go. Okay. I'd like to get everybody out of the way, but at least I can see more of my slides now. I thought I could. Okay, why prospecting for life? This is so, I apologize, but this is really distracting. Why can't I?
Let's see.
Get everybody out of the way. Okay. Okay, reasons. Now I'm ready to launch. The choice of prospecting as the verb was reminding what Laurie said of how true. We used to go hunting for, when we could, in the backcountry for dark sites to set up our telescope and keep coming across all the many unsuccessful gold miner digs. And that reminded me a lot of some of what one reads about, all the excitement of looking for bio signs in other planets and other solar systems. And so I thought, well, really, the real problem in many of those is that the miners didn't really know the signs of where they were likely to find gold they were presumably looking for. So what I'm going to do is go quickly over what is needed to get more precise signs of biosignatures of life off Earth. So first, running through the building essentials for life to arise. That obviously has to come, well, from space, but also about what we know from prospecting on Earth, building blocks, assembly vessel. A chef can't cook a stew without having a pot. In this case, it has to be an enclosed one, and energy sources. Then look at specifically in the solar system on Earth, when, where, and how. Is really the bulk of the talk, and then going on, excuse me, to life on Mars and on Venus. And what we know and already and could know a lot more and will know a lot more very soon, give us more focused hypotheses for life elsewhere. And then end with life on extra solar system planets, big question mark, and the future. So building blocks, the minerals and molecules that are out there in the dark nebulae are really many common, and this is only a smattering. And the last two groups are more complicated minerals. I just chose those as examples of ones which have elements that are important for life here and probably for elsewhere. And this last one, Schreiber's site, was very exciting to find because it was known from experiments on Earth to give a route to phosphorylation, which is a very important feature in biological materials on Earth and probably elsewhere. Interestingly, too, recently, very recently, or more recently, formamide has been found, and formamide's made known from Earth as being a combination of hydrogen and water and hydrogen cyanide. And what's interesting about that is on Earth, it had already been shown that to produce, when treated properly, all four of the ribonucleotides that make up RNA and other biological molecules. So to find it's already made in space was pretty exciting, suggesting that other molecules might be there. And in fact, there are many, many more complex organic molecules, just a few: glucose, glycine, and amino acid goes into proteins, ribose into the nucleic acids. Interestingly, on Earth, proteins or these molecules are twisted in a way that if they're going to link end to end, they'll either be twisted right-handed, as are all the nucleic acids on Earth, or with a left-handed twist as far as the amino acids go. And both of these have been found in space. So there's something selected one or the other, or maybe it was just happen chance, because you can't mix the two and have a nicely twisted DNA helix, for example. And then this year, less than 2 months, August, 2 months ago, this ethanolamine was found. And this is the first molecule that's part of membrane component, and has been a puzzler of how to get membranes assembled on Earth. So that was a very recent new twist. These building blocks are in all the dark nebulae, in these dark nebulae where stars, as you know, form when by gravitational collapse of the ingredients. A nascent star gives birth to a nascent, something like an infant sun, an infant planetary system. If this were our sun, then we have the 4 rocky planets around it, places where Earth might form. Now, don't assume right off that because these are assembled from components in the dark nebulae, that all of those are going to be there. And it's becoming maybe increasingly a question of how many of them make it in to this this whirling hot disk and survive and don't come apart, and particularly for the gases and how our carbon arrived, the amount that we have has been brought into question. So definitely more prospecting needed there. But let's turn to making the comparison of the 3 rocky planets where we could expect to find life now. Whatever happened on poor little Mercury, we're never going to know, because we're not going to get there in order to look for it. The red stripes across from Mars, Earth, Venus are volcanic activities. The purple, liquid water, and the green conditions this is called conditions favorable for DNA life-based, DNA-based life. This is based on what we know about Earth. So it would appear that all these 3 planets would have obtained life pretty much at the same time out here somewhere at 3.5 billion years ago. Problem is that Earth actually started life much earlier. So a question is why, and what went on, and what were the conditions that allowed this unexpected jump start, so to speak. So what I'm going to do is look at what happened on Earth in this time frame, because you figure out if Mars and Venus were on the expected time track, then they would have had about the same time to this roughly 2 billion years ago to have reached a state that Earth is now. And if you follow my reasoning there, so that's why I'm concentrating on this period, giving the chance for our neighboring planets to catch up to where Earth was 2 billion years ago. So life emerged very early. The evidence comes from fossils. All of these are some of the oldest. There are many more. These come up either from digging or along coastlines. If you recognize Baffin Island, that's what it is. When very ancient bits of rock that have been subducted or emerged with lava. So life that we know it, as our ancestors started then, but there was quite excitement. And when these critters were found, fossils, they are totally unlike Earth fossils. The ones above them much larger, a lot of speculation. They hung around for a while and disappeared. The fact they're so much larger, there's no sign of precursors, made it really seem that these might be a second start of life. Unfortunately, or fortunately, but interestingly, it's been shown that one can, under particular circumstances, get fossil rocks, you might say. You can get these formations that look like this without life. So it may be a failed hypothesis, but it's an important one when we go prospecting elsewhere, to not jump to conclusions if we find a fossil, a bit of rock that looks possibly Earth-like, and to think it is. It could look carefully, and that's what was done here, to how you could form fossilized rocks that without life. And then, surprisingly, there's not a timeline on this, but in April of this year, very interesting, provocative study found that some bacterial viruses use an alternative genetic code. Now, viruses have probably arose about when bacteria did, or very soon afterwards. They're very small bits of DNA. They're not all bad. 13% of our genes have a viral origin. They integrate, they've spread across animal groups so that they've really messed up the idea of a coherent tree of evolution, or even a bush of evolution, because there's side exchange. So moving on though, well, that needs it needs more work on it. But where did it start? Well, hydrothermal vents, these are some among the oldest fossil pipes. Many of these have been found not just in Australia. And of course, volcanoes, hot springs, and experiments from the hematite tubes actually set off some very interesting experimental work, creating miniature, the right size, little tubes in the lab with the conditions that were known to be in these deep hydrothermal vents from deep sea exploration, and found that with a thermal gradient up the tube, if you're passing seawater, basically water with all the various little components in it, that different molecules will settle on the edge of the tube at different temperatures. And once they're stuck to the edge of the tube, they grab on to other members of the same species. So you can get strings of molecules of one kind just by this geometric arrangement. So how did it start? Bit about prebiotic chemistry on Earth. I'm going to try to do this quickly, but I don't want to say it's all very complicated, because it's being worked out. And also that doesn't leave you anything to be able to judge new claims about plausible biosignatures. So there have been lots of experiments in the lab showing plausible ways to get strands of RNA or DNA, and to get amino acids into peptides, which are proteins, which are enzymes for specific functions. So that produces a sort of chicken and egg problem, because the proteins, enzymes, are what do DNA or mediate DNA replication, transcription of all three kinds of RNA, translation of the message in mRNA into proteins. So it's circular. How do you get the proteins to start off the process? Just earlier this year, an interesting paper showed that the short strands of RNA called transfer RNAs, they're the ones that pick up the amino acids and take it into the mRNA, where the mRNA is located, and line them up in the right order so that the enzymatic proteins can do their trick. But since these little sequences of transfer RNAs, when they arose, is not clear, but they're short. They could have arisen prebiotic, and that they can assemble sequences into working as a replicator. Then we have the problem of RNA and proteins to a ribosomal precursor. How do you get that? That's ribosomes are the oldest living universal molecular assembly. There are two components. I just put in a modern ribosome to show you how much evolution has happened, but very complicated structures, with one unit reading the DNA and the other unit enzymatically joining the amino acids with the help of transfer RNAs. So the ribosomal RNA core, with using molecular genetics to trace the lineage backwards, so philo or molecular genetics takes this core back to very early in life. So you still had to have life, you had to have a cell, but that's just one component of it, but it's obviously it's very old. The last point, and this is on this formation of precursors, is how do you get from a simple lipid to assembly of vessel, which becomes eventually the cell membrane. Simple lipid, not too long ago, a simple lipid exposed to UV was shown to have a bright light wavelengths to convert into a two-tailed lipid, which is stable at those wavelengths. And somehow or other, the head end, one end of these lipid molecules become phosphorylated. And here's where the excitement of this finding ethanolamine in space came from, because it's in the head of every phospholipid head on the lipid molecules. Single-tailed lipids just ball themselves up into what are called micelles. Their tails, which are hydrophobic, hidden from water, and their hydrophilic heads around the outside. But two-tailed lipids spontaneously assemble into these bilayers that spontaneously roll up into a membrane in closed containers. So, but this is a so there's enclosed inside is whatever was in the surrounding solution, more outside, but there's no way for anything to get across except water with difficulty, so they don't burst or shrink, but they're not living. They're not a cell, this isn't a cell membrane. So the question is, how do you get to a functional cell membrane in which there are complicated proteins which have to be formed by ribosomes nowadays, embedded in the lipid layer? So that's an open question still. I like this quote. It was from Albert Szent-Györgyi, great physiologist who studied cellular biochemistry and received the Nobel, among other things, and was a philosopher as well. And basically came up with a very appropriate quote or the description of what life is: nothing but an electron looking for a place to rest. So just a reminder that a reduced substance is a donor who gives an electron to an oxidized substance, which is an electron receptor, and then they switch places, so to speak, the reducer becoming oxidized, reducer. And so you could have it cycle, but you can also, once you've started this, the electron can be passed on to form an electron transport chain, which is what's characteristic of the energy pathways in life. So what are the fuels for life to get going? Well, of course, everyone would think of light first, but I put although this is quite recently discovered, I put it first because this EAT, extracellular electron transport, is what it sounds like: an extracellular chain of outside a cell will provide an electron that the cell accepts or takes in. Actually, these cells are not well studied as yet, but some appear to put out extensions to the minerals or make direct contact with them. And there may even be some shuttling between the solutions. Then we have photosynthesis. But we think of photosynthesis as being the usual oxygenic, or before that, and along with it still, anoxygenic photosynthesis. But the fact that it can be abiotic and something like this has been proposed to possibly occur at Gale Crater. So there's something that we may know if Mars explorers ask the right questions and look at the right place and analyze the samples correctly. Inorganic oxygenic photosynthesis, non-oxygenic photosynthesis. Okay, that inorganic is, I won't say more about, it's too complicated takes too long, but the non-oxygenetic photosynthesis uses photosystem 2. That's what green plants use. Electron transfer. And these are the guys. Sorry, I lost the cursor. There we go. That live on substances like these. And oxygenic photosynthesis uses the older photosystem 2 and the younger photosystem 1. The numbering is the way it is for star formation. The youngest stars, as astronomers know and have called, are type 3 stars, and the newest, like the sun, type 1. So this is ultimately produces oxygen and carbohydrates, and what we all depend on. And then there are other chemical, what's called anaerobiosis, other ways of chemical energy, using chemical energy from minerals such as these, nitrogen, sulfur, arsenic. And last, I forgot to finish putting the DOI in, but you can look this up, February 2021, radiolysis, using radioactivity as a way of gaining electrons for life. And this is reported from very deep living organisms, both in deep mine pits and in the ocean. These are from plates that have been subducted deep. So they're not, this isn't newly evolved. They're very more recently evolved, but it potentially could be a way of starting life slowly. It's a balance between being torn apart by radioactivity and getting energized to do something. So let's put these in this perspective. What were the conditions for life on Earth that that jump-started the process ahead of our neighboring planets? So Earth started, young Earth was, as you know, would have had a magnetic field kind of disrupted. This is from a modeling of expected magnetic field made partway through our planet's evolution. Of course, it would have had daily light-dark rhythms from the start, also seasonal. And then the asteroid Theia, roughly Mars size, struck this young Earth. They both flew apart into particles that reassembled, as you know, and gave us our very large, stable, wonderful moon, Luna. Very soon after that, we have a crust. This is actually crust number 2, and a temperature temperate climate and oceans, atmospheres. And I say crust number 2 because in this reformation of the Earth and the acquisition of Luna, the initial crust, which would have been very radioactive, hot, not conducive to starting life, would have been blown off. And so this would have been the second forming crust. And that, as far as I can understand, it seems to be the most likely and crucial event that started life or allowed life to get started early, because that's about when life first appeared. So just quickly, a few highlights. This is simplified from what I've done. Life started, chemosynthesis, archaea, life, this first life was bacteria. Archaea have evolved, split off from bacteria. So at this point, there were big worlds of archaea and bacteria evolving. Bacterial photosynthesis started, oxygen photosynthesis, we've seen that. First circadian clock gene has been traced back to this point very early. And eukaryotes, cells with nuclei and internal membranes, are more immediate ancestors than bacteria and archaea. And I say that both because eukaryotes have an internal physiology, an internal biochemistry that's most like archaea, which evolved from bacteria as an offshoot, but their membranes are like bacterial membranes. So they're really we are a hybrid of bacteria and archaea. Multicellular life forms over this time span, and we're way past that. We're going to way past the 2 billion years, evolved many times. The algal ancestors and photosynthetic plants only evolved even later, in the later part of this. Terrestrial plants very more recently. Just a reminder of what the tree, this really should be a bush of life, looks like. These are the archaea, and here the branch of including the eukaryotes, and we are just stuck down here on the corner. This arrow isn't too accurate, but all of this currently. So what about extraterrestrial life in the solar system, our rocky neighbors? I like the curiosity so much, I use it to represent Mars and Venus. So what are they like now? And what can we deduce from what they would have been like back then? I'm not going to spend much time at all on Mars because you probably have on your fingertips much more than I've kept up with. This is an old slide, but I liked it because it's colorful. I think it's easy to read, and you can see that there have been excursions over much of Mars' surface. But more recent, quite recent one is this biosignatures of volcanic rock. This is a study done on Earth that has showed how you can get fossilization of filamentous microbial mats on Earth that look like this, and which resembles some fossils, turned out to be pseudo fossils that were suggested from some photographs from Mars. So it's this kind of continuing prospecting on Earth that it is valuable in hunting for life elsewhere. April of this year, new estimation of the time period of Mars climate during this, before it dried up about 3 billion years ago, excuse me, Mars has the right ingredients for present day microbial life under its surface that we've heard in a number of ways. And new estimates of magnetic fields, possibly important. And there are other interesting recent reports from Mars, but let's move on to Venus. A few years ago, 2 years ago, the paper on the discovery of this cute little phosphine molecule on the cloud deck of Venus, and that was then reanalyzed and showed, same authors, Greaves and her team, that there is indeed a signal. And there's previous work from the first explorations of much cruder chemistry of sending space probes into Venus that's identified phosphorus. So it's all fairly not unexpected to find phosphorus there. But what's so special about this phosphine? Well, and what was very special about Reeves and collaborators' work was they had assembled a list of hundreds of molecules that are specific, as far as they could tell, to life, and so potentially could be useful as biosignatures from a distance. And they proceeded to do the chemistry to show that there were on Earth, no way in laboratory or with whatever techniques they could come up with, could this be made any way other than by organisms. I don't have time to show you this video, but I'm putting it up so you can get the website. This down at the bottom from MIT. It's a really nice video describing this if you'd like to follow it up. So what's what's known about the permanent and continuous cloud cover on Venus, and then a possible timeline. I try to keep this on. Okay, so here's Venus surface going up to 100 kilometers. In the middle layer of this continuous cloud cover is a temperate zone that corresponds to a pressure of 1 with respect to Earth. So Earth's gravity. Reasonable temperatures, 60 here, but up at this altitude of 50, 60 kilometers. If you expand this zone, the hypothesis for how you could have organisms here starts with some spores that are carried upward by updrafts into this middle habitable temperate zone area, where they start to hydrate and become enclosed in water and other chemical vesicles, develop and divide, grow, as shown by 4 and these will get swirled around. Of course, some will be lost to space, but eventually they get so large that gravity pulls them down the lower part of the temperate zone. And at this point, they divide more and form spores, and will then, some of them enter this pool as a recycle. Of course, some will be lost there. This is because of the global circulation of the atmosphere on on Venus, this is quite conceivably a very sustainable cycle because they're Hadley cells in the atmosphere for you meteorological people that spread out 30 degrees or more north and south from the equator, and so quite conceivable. I've included the description of this so people can look at this later. But Earth has an aerial biosphere. You may not be aware of this, but it's, of course, the surface is equivalent to that, 47 kilometers up on Venus. Some gets lost, of course, but most cycle. Here we have very much a similar thing, except that instead of going to neutral buoyancy as the spores or the critters do on Venus, they settle onto Earth. Winds will carry them up into the atmosphere where they get hydrated and form condensation nuclei and contribute to cloud cover. And that's partly what led people from Carl Sagan onward to suggest that the denser clouds seen from high in the stratosphere might be organisms. These go through a cycle that's similar to what we've just described on Venus. Some will get lost, but eventually they settle down. And the big difference is that these can be metabolically active, but we are well aware this cloud cover isn't continuous, so they tend to would be in one geographical region, but they can travel far. As we know, we've had microbes from Asia have been found over North America, North Americans over Europe. They can, if gotten up in high enough winds, high enough altitudes, can travel around the world. I've done the same thing here. So the big difference, I've already gone over those. So this last figure just shows that the actual metabolic life cycle up in the clouds has been worked out. As it would be up in the clouds, has been worked out for these organisms, and it goes quite reasonably and fits in with the hypothesis that similar events are happening on Venus in the temperate zone. I put this in. It's another bit of prospecting on Earth from the Swiss research center, Planet S. I won't go into that. I had to look up what that meant, but it's interesting. But this group has for some time been working on a system to detect molecular homochromality. That's the right-handedness, left-handedness that we described earlier, which is a molecular property of all Earthlings, whether they can detect this from above ground by, so far I've gotten up and flying a helicopter. The point is to be able to survey life on Earth at a larger scale, but not, and quickly, not one that otherwise can be done because you're not down on the ground making measurements, but you can be as select areas you want to. Could this be a way for detecting life on other planets? Well, the next step, which they're hoping to move to, is after taking it up into higher in the helicopter into airplanes, is to take their system, which involves a lot of complicated computers and computation as well as detectors, to look down on Earth from ISS to see whether homochirality as a biosignature can be seen as Earth's biosignature from the ISS. And then if this works, it could possibly be used for looking at life on Venus. Maybe that would be the next obvious one, and way out there, maybe on beyond our solar system, using this. Here's the reference. So 2003, I reread this, Why Life May Be Common and Intelligence Rare. I read it last winter when going through old journals, and it's a good article, but it's what led me, I think, to deciding to try to pull things together, the problems I saw with it, as to what's left out often for this talk. So their arguments are Earth microbes appear early, therefore life expected on most rocky planets. But why was it so much early on Earth than on Venus and Mars? This was known long before this article was written. Is Earth a rocky planet? No, I wouldn't say if one of 4 rocky planets makes it typical, that's in the solar system. And could life have started later? And maybe it did, we don't know for sure, but it's possible. Complex life emerged 85% through Earth's history. So taken to mean that most life-bearing planets host only microbes. Well, that seems good enough. And we're approaching the end of Earth's habitability implies the emergence of intelligence is uncommon. Well, that's okay. But Homo sapiens, who's doing all this thinking about this, our genus, not even our species, started only 200,000 years ago. So how long do we have to look, considering that we're so close to the end of Earth's habitability? So solar systems recently a nifty way of looking out beyond the solar system, I thought was pretty nifty way of looking, was in this study that looked at using data from Gaia, particularly, to locate planets or solar systems, sorry, which lie in from us, lie in along the ecliptic. The white arrows in either side, you can see the sun's over there. So and if these solar systems have aliens, you want to now you hunt for planets with aliens to these particular stars. They could be looking at us, maybe they are, maybe they aren't, but we could be looking at them. They would be looking for Earth passing in front of the sun, of course, or all the planets passing in front of the sun. Okay, so life in the solar system. Where's mine now? Today, it's where we are. This is the whole solar system, or from beginning to end. So the green here is the period up, and this got shifted. Well, no, it hasn't gotten shifted. We know that that Earthlings will continue for a while yet, but humans are this little strip here, and started not long, it's too long a strip, started not long ago, and will go on for a little bit more, but things will get too hot, too dry, and atmosphere will change as the sun eventually will turn Earth into a crisp. So how long do we have to look? I'm having problems again with my,
Is there an issue?
no, how can I, what's that? No, I'll forget it. Anyway, you can see, yeah, I think you can see the whole slide, right?
That's
The
correct.
top.
Yeah, it looks good.
Okay, thank you. So if you're looking, best to know what you're looking for and where you might find it before you start. So with that, I'll leave it.
Thank you.
And now
Yeah.
how can I?
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much, Dorothy. We might have time for questions. I'll do it. Check to see if anybody does happen to have any questions. So we'll wait a minute, and if anyone on the Zoom call wants to chime in with a question, you're welcome to. I'll start off, I guess. I was curious about, you showed this sort of life cycles diagrams for both Venus and for Earth.
Yeah.
And I noticed like the Earth one had a component that involved water, liquid water. So
Yeah, all of the whole, yeah.
how important, so if that's like what we know to be on Earth, how important is that, like, and how likely is it to work without the water on Venus?
That scenario would not, by the way, I'm sorry, I've lost the view. Oh, no,
No wonder. That's okay.
but I can hear you. I just, all I have is asking me whether I want to, what if I do a cancel? All I see is sick of 40-minute time limit. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be wasting the time. I've lost
all right. This was
screen,
really
but I
great.
can see your face. So let me pull this up and anyway, I thought I've done enough of these. I thought I knew how to.
Dorothy,
Okay, anyway.
Dorothy, would you like me to stop your sharing?
Okay, maybe that's what it needs to be done, presumably.
I just did that for you.
Okay, thank you, David. You're
welcome.
always saved me from, you have saved me from so
Thanks,
much.
David.
Yeah, so out on Venus, it depends on having water in that temperate zone, along with a lot of other nasty stuff. But there is enough there, apparently. And the chemistry of the atmosphere at that level is such that scheme could work. But I think that's what you were asking, Kelvin.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah, about the possibility of working without a nice body of liquid water.
Outside of it?
Yeah.
Not only is it, they go to the spore state, which is basically like many spores on Earth, which can last of complex organisms, actually can last for centuries and be rehydrated and return to sex and reproduction and prolific life as long as they have water, and then they go back to being spores. So
okay.
that alternation is something that happens on Earth.
Wow. All right. Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, me personally, I know very little about biology and life cycles, so it was good to know. There's another question here. Langtang asks, I was curious about the idea of panspermia. Could that be talked about? What are your thoughts on panspermia?
That's the thought of passing from one planet to another. Is that correct?
Yeah, of life somehow.
Yes. Well,
transferring to
I kind of skipped that because of time, but in prospecting for life within the solar system, we started out sending probes all over the place with very little attention about sterilization, and we can't completely sterilize. So there may be Earth bacteria, Earth genomes all over the place. Question is, back to your previous one, would they survive? But if they landed, say, on someplace like Venus, Mars in particular, and since there are conditions on Mars right now, it appears where there are rocks and water, and they might have made it. If they happened long enough ago, they might have stayed separate and be recognizable, or they may have already interbred after all, intermixed, and we'll have what will sort of appear like a new life form, but with a lot of similarities to Earth's genome. So yeah, but in terms of realistically, in the past, it's unlikely.
All right, that's really one.
I have a question. Maybe they are waiting for us. They are saying, how long? Why is it taking so long for you to come up to Mars?
Yeah, that's right. Good point, Sid. And you're probably saying, why am I taking so long when I think you're up next, aren't you?
No, that's
That's good. Sid and I are good friends. We can josh with each other.
No, I'm talking about the bacteria. This bacteria which hitchhiked their trip to Mars on our earlier probes.
Yeah, quite well. They survive outside the space station. Some of them do. Its survival isn't high, but for quite some time. And of course, they don't have the same exposure, and it's a lot shorter time than a trip to Mars. But still, it's an indication of what some Earthlings can do.
All right,
Dorothy, I have a question just before we lead off to the next segment. I was wondering, so you mentioned these other molecules, these complex molecules that we find in nebulae. What would be the main way they make it onto the surface of a planet? Like, I know water and some chemicals can make it in through asteroid impacts, but I would imagine a lot of those would destroy or like oxidize those more complex chemicals. How do you get significant amounts of them to the surface?
Yeah, an interesting complex question, but with all the minerals large that in the dark nebulae, which act as surfaces to which other molecules attach, and that's how some of the big ones form. If those get swept in, they might be stable enough to actually survive that planetary disk and in the planetary disk and join up with the planetesimals that form the planets. But what I didn't take much time to emphasize, but it's fairly new. I mean, that's been the general thought, as I understand it. I'm not a planetologist. I'm certainly not an astronomer. So, but I know a little bit about biology. That this question about how some of them that were assumed to have arrived as we know them directly are actually broken apart and reassembled. And one of them is actually carbon, which was thought to come in as the carbon dioxide, but apparently it does not survive the conditions of a planetary system. And that's a very recent, interesting study, very recent, a few weeks ago, I think, that was looking at recognizing that and how you could get, and determining that, how you could get the amount of carbon there is or there is on Earth now. That was the big question. And then, but how much carbon could there be in a planet the size of Earth? It's a complicated situation, but this really raises a basic question that we don't really know yet how we got the carbon that we that on Earth that needs say no more.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So still sort of an open question in a lot of respects.
That's right. So it just goes back to this prospecting with a goal in mind. Don't just go out and this might be related. This is related to Earth here, so maybe we'll find life here. But what else could there be, and what could survive where we're looking? So prospecting with an idea of improving your success.
Okay.
We don't have that much longer.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much, Dorothy. Thanks for an excellent talk.
Yeah, thanks.
I learned a huge amount. It was really fantastic to see all that really recent research highlighted in your talk. Very cool to get an update on the state of, I guess, the potential for abiogenesis in the universe.
Yeah, well, I didn't know what I was going to be getting into when I accepted David's invitation. About March, I guess it was. I thought I kind of knew what most of it. I knew I was a lot I didn't know, but I didn't know how much there was going to come between accepting and what I was getting myself into.
Well, we thank you for your diligent attention to the updates to the research, the current state of the field.
That's the only thing that makes it fun, really. Otherwise, it's an old story.
Yeah.
Which can be fun.
All right. Well, thanks again. I think we're going to move on to our next segment here. But Dorothy, feel free to stay online, and maybe you can jump in for a question or two during Ask an Astronomer. I'm next. So next up, I'm going to tell you a little bit about some astronomy news. First off, though, I want to make a correction to something I talked about last time, 2 weeks ago. I mentioned the ALMA discovery of a moon-forming disk around a planet. And that time I said that, can you all see my mouse? Yes, you can. Okay. So last time I said that this dot in the center here was the planet with a big ring around it and a moon forming. That's not correct. I was wrong. The star is actually in the center here, and it's been blocked out of the data, subtracted out. And so this blobby region is a very small portion of the disk around the star, big circumstellar disk out here. And then this inset here, the hot spot in the center is the planet that is forming, and it has its own little disk around it where you can see some detail, and in that is forming new moons. I previously said that this was the moon. So I just wanted to correct myself on that. And then for my second piece of news, I wanted to give an update. How do I move this Zoom toolbar? Let's see. No, that one. There we go. Yeah, so a few weeks ago, I talked about the aurorae on Jupiter and how they were driven. And these are very much like the aurorae we see here on Earth. They come from charged particles riding the magnetic field of a planet and slamming into its atmosphere. And in that one, I was talking about how the aurora seems to flicker on and off in a pulsation, and that may be driven by some resonance with stellar winds. But this new article talks about how these aurorae actually drive the heating of the upper atmosphere on Jupiter. So Jupiter's upper atmosphere is quite a bit warmer than we would expect from its general energy budget. like how much energy it receives from sunlight, how much of the heat of its formation is still making its way out from the core of it to the surface. It's too hot to be explained by those factors. So what this recent research has done is by using the Keck telescope, looking in infrared, they've actually mapped out the heat distribution over the surface of Jupiter in really high detail. Previously, they were only able to do this with a couple pixel resolution, which really isn't that good. It's hard to tell if there are any processes like where a source of heat might be or whether it's just sort of generally hot. In this case, they were able to get it down to like a 2 by 2 degree latitude by 2 degree longitude per pixel. So really able to finally map out that detail. And they were able to see that there are peaks of heat at the north and south poles. This is an artist's impression. The real image would be much, much more pixelated. But that heat spreads from the aurorae down towards the equator where it cools off a bit. And this has been suspected for a long time, but this is the first piece of research that really shows that the distribution of heat is driven by these aurorae hitting the north and south pole. And what this effectively does is because these aurorae are driven, oh gosh, cat just jumped on my keyboard. Where'd it go? There it is. The magnetic field of Jupiter is much, much larger than the planet itself. So it allows it to sweep up a huge chunk of the solar wind and drive it down into the atmosphere. So it can collect essentially the solar wind from a much larger area than would otherwise hit the planet. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to cut it there and pass things along to our Ask an Astronomer team of Sid Sidhu and Ruhi Jan Mohammed. And I believe Amy is going to join us to toss them some questions from the YouTube and Zoom chats. So let me stop sharing. That would help. There we are. Hi, Sid. Hi, Ruhi.
Hello, how are you?
Doing well.
Oh,
all right,
excellent.
Amy, I'll pass things over to you.
Happy anniversary.
Next thank you. Yes, coming up very soon. Number 14.
Number 14. Gee, you're not that old.
I started dating in high school.
Good grief. Anyway, nice to be here. Hello, Rui.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. I think maybe easiest for tonight, just a reminder that if anyone has any questions that they can think of, please either put them in the chat window for Zoom or on YouTube, and it can be anything. If we can get to them tonight, we will, and if not, we'll hold them over for another night. So just, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and I will present them. And I'm just wondering first, I think, Sid and Ruhi, would you like to just quickly say a couple things about yourselves?
Go ahead, Ruhi.
Okay. For sure. Hi, my name is Ruhi Jan Mohammed. I'm in my final year of my degree at the University of Victoria, doing a combined degree in astronomy and physics. And right now I am doing research exploring deeply embedded protostellar outflows and their shapes, as well as looking for stars around white dwarfs with Karun up at the DAO soon. We'll get back to it after COVID. But yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Hello, everyone. My name is Sid Sidhu. I'm a member of the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, Victoria Centre. I have been involved for so long, almost 30 odd years. And I just love it. And my main interest is public outreach. So that's what I live for, in a way. I hope the questions will be easy for us to answer, and if not, then we will simply pass on to the experts.
I love that.
Okay. Okay, so So yes, we can always pass, of course, if we
Sure.
don't know the answer. And Dorothy is on the call still, and we have a lot of very bright minds, I know, on the Zoom call. So if somebody needs to jump in, they can do that, right?
Excellent.
So the first question I think I am going to ask Ruhi, which is you have, so I know that you've learned or that you're studying a bit about planet evolution. Are you able to kind of say what the most interesting thing about that you kind of learned or come across in planet evolution?
In planet evolution.
Yes.
I do more in stellar evolution, but planet evolution is very cool. I do like.
You could say stellar evolution, like what's interesting about stellar evolution as well.
You could just get me on a roadmap on my research, and I won't stop talking. But actually, I know you did also ask me a question on just like what deeply embedded protostars are, so I can just throw that in there as well. So I think these are really cool because a protostar is basically a baby star, if you will. It hasn't started fusing hydrogen in its core, so it's definitely not as powerful yet. So when we have a deeply embedded protostar, we have a star or a protostar that is surrounded by this huge cloud of gas and dust that is creating this star. And it's so opaque that the light from the star cannot actually really escape it. So we can't see it with optical light. So what we use to actually look at these stars is near infrared. So that's why they're called deeply embedded. We can only look at them through like a much longer wavelength. And I also look at their outflows. So sometimes, or most of the time, these stars will have accretion disks around them. And these accretion disks help the star build, gain mass, and then therefore start fusion in its core. But sometimes they can get these outflows. And that's when the accretion disk starts falling in onto the star, and then the star kind of spits out the rest of the mass that it doesn't really need. And it creates these gigantic outflows, considerably larger than the actual star itself. And I wish I had pictures to show you. They're really cool. But they're huge. And I'm using the ALMA telescope to look at some specific sources where you can actually study the shape of these outflows, and they can be in just like a single outflow. Sometimes you get a binary outflow. Sometimes you get a binary protostellar system with two outflows coming out of them. So they can be pretty complicated. And right now we're just trying to figure out a model to fit these outflows, because that hasn't really been done yet. So it's in the process. But yeah, I guess just baby stars are my favorite thing. Baby stars or stars when they explode and die are kind of my favorite things. That's, I think, when they're the most interesting. Like when they're in the middle of their lifespans, they're all right. They're kind of boring. They're not doing a whole lot. But when they're starting to explode, that's when it gets cool.
They show their tantrums.
Yes. They have
like old folks.
Yeah. Okay, and now, another question, and I'm not sure who is best to answer this, so I'll just throw it out, which is, what is the brightest star in the sky? I think for people who follow us on social media, they would have seen that last weekend we kind of posted about the fact that Polaris is not actually, I think, people think that it is the brightest sky, but it's actually, I think, the 50th brightest. What is the brightest star right now?
Sirius. Get serious with life. So the Sirius is the brightest star which we could see from the Earth, of course. Yeah.
What
and
constellation is that?
It's in the big dog. It's the big Ursa.
Alpha Canis Major.
Canis Major, yeah.
There it is.
Thank you.
No worries.
And it's about 8 light years away. So when we look at the star, we are looking in the past 8 years ago. The light left that long ago. Yeah. And
that's actually relatively close.
It's relatively, about twice as further away than the nearest star.
Um, okay, here's another one. How do astronomers accurately determine the wobble in a star's motion when they're viewing?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah. Do you have an answer, Rui?
I don't know how they accurately do that. What kind of wobble are they referring to?
Okay, let me take
Because
a
we're told that
let me take a stab at it.
Okay.
When we look at the light of a star, either it is turning left and right, or it's coming towards us or going further away from us. So we look at the light and see whether it's coming towards us based on is the blue shifted or red shifted if it's going further away from us. So we know direction from that angle. Wobble is left and right in a way, is based on the monitoring the star, as I understood, monitoring the star and seeing how it shifts. If it's the closest to us, we look at the parallax of the star. After 6 months, we look its position relative to the nearby stars. And if it shifted, we say it wobble, goes left and right. So by looking at the star's position relative to its nearest neighbor, optically speaking, nearest neighbors. Yeah.
Thank you.
The other solution is that we also see the star, if there is a planet going around it, big enough planet, then it will go left and right. It will position and also go towards us and further away from us, yeah, based on the planet going around it. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Next question. And this one is from my daughter. So might not be. Anyway, I will ask the question. Okay. So because it's kind of come up lately, right, with billionaires deciding to fly off, that there is, the edge of space, right? Like there's an area that is in space and then not, apparently. And what my daughter was wondering is the blue that we see through the atmosphere, at what point is that not, so when these folks have gone up to the edge of space, essentially, are they still within our atmosphere? Are they still seeing blue, or are they seeing the black expanse of space?
Oh, that's a good question. I hope someone has an answer. And I think they're still in space, unless you're 300,000 kilometers away. Our GPS satellites, they are quite far up there. And whether they will see blue, if you're on the moon, you definitely don't see blue. You will see a dark, yeah. And yeah. I don't have a right answer how far away up you have to go before you lose the blueness of the sky.
I might be able to help with that one. So basically, it sort of depends which direction you're looking. So if you get up to what's called a suborbital flight, so this is anything around 100 kilometers up, I think. The definition varies because like the atmosphere sort of thins out. There's not really an edge to it. So you can find different definitions. But basically, if you go more than about 50 kilometers up, you're above most of the atmosphere. So you would start seeing the sky above you turn black. But if you looked down at the horizon, you would still see a significant amount of blue. Like you'd see sort of, as your view dropped right towards the horizon, you'd see it getting lighter and lighter and lighter, and then like this strip of blue above the Earth, and then you'd see the Earth's surface. So wherever you're looking through a big enough column of atmosphere, where the line of your sight is hitting enough air molecules. As long as those air molecules are lit by the sun, you're going to see blue. It's just usually that column, we have enough of that column above us as well. But when you're suborbital, it's mostly to the side that you'd see that much.
So the astronauts in the International Space Station, when they look up, they will see dark. If they look towards the horizon as the spacecraft is going around the Earth, they will look towards the horizon, they will see blue.
They'll see a strip of blue, yeah. And the higher you are, the smaller that strip will get.
Yeah.
But you can find, you can look at images from the ISS and sort of see that blue haze just above the surface of the Earth.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
I think you could be part of the panel here.
Yes.
I try and let other folks share the spotlight.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, a personal question for each of you. I'll start with Ruby, if that's okay. What is your favorite constellation or planet and why?
Oh, or planet. No. That's like constellation. Yeah, definitely got that one. Then you added planets to the mix. I think. Okay, personally, I've always loved Venus. I think it's just such a cool planet. It's like an Earth, but like worse. Just kind of like, you know, it's telling us we should maybe get ourselves in check and fix this climate crisis. Otherwise, we could end up like Venus. But I've also always really loved Uranus. I feel like it doesn't get enough attention that it should get. It's a really cool planet. It's really blue. It's really out there. It's also on its side, which is really cool. We don't have like a full definitive answer as to why it's on its side, but astronomers love to jump to the assumption that it was hit by something really big, or something came into and interacted with it, so it would get on its side. But the fact that we don't have an answer yet makes it's really cool to me. Also that it has a ring, and most people don't know about that as well. The ring is just made of like mostly just dust. So it's really dark, and it's also so far away that it doesn't reflect a lot of the sun like light off of it. So yeah, Venus and Uranus. I'll give you two answers.
Okay, and Sid, same question.
My favorite constellation is Orion. It's so good to show to the public through its scope. It's a big nebula. And also it's a shape. It's like a big giant with the big club ready to hit the bull, the Taurus. And so I like that planet, the constellation. My favorite planet, of course, is the Earth. But if I look up towards the sky, my favorite planet is Saturn, because it's so beautiful to show the first time to a new person who have never seen a planet, because this is awesome. This is just a most beautiful, aspiring view through a scope.
Mm-hmm.
Those are my favorite constellation of planet.
Okay, I don't know if either of you are able to answer this, but can you explain what radio astronomy is and how that's different from what we see at the DAO, like how we view through the DAO? Is that?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
So radio astronomy, so what it's based off of is the electromagnetic spectrum. So light can come at us in different wavelengths that range from microwave all the way to gamma rays. And as gamma rays are shorter wavelengths, while microwaves and radio waves are longer wavelengths. So when we do radio astronomy, we need things like those really big radio dishes, or like the satellite dishes that you might have on your house. We have really big ones when we have radio telescopes, like the ones at Alma, the ones that I actually use for my research. And they are able to put multiple radio dishes together to create an even larger telescope, while the ones at the DAO, like the Plaskett, are optical telescopes. So we can see optical light through the plasket, while radio telescopes can see radio waves through the dishes.
Yep.
Okay, I think that.
That's right. That was it.
And chime isn't quite the same as the average radio telescope, right? Chime works a little bit differently.
I'm not
It's
too
the
knowledgeable.
same. Chime is a radio telescope.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna.
Yeah.
I feel like Aaron has his. I think Aaron has his hand up.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
Okay, so I love chime. Chime is amazing. So basically, whereas with a normal radio dish, you have like, it's like saucer shaped, right? And you point it towards the thing you're looking at, and the whole saucer collects light and bounces it up to a single receiver. So you're essentially looking down a line at the center of that dish. But it turns out, this is built off of our experience with visible light telescopes, where you, in order to see anything, you basically have to bounce all of the light to a single point and put it on your camera, because we can't measure the entire light wave for visible light. It's too small, it's too fast. But radio is a bit different. With a radio antenna, we can actually, because they oscillate so slowly, we can actually trace the whole wave as it comes in. This is what allows us to do what's called interferometry, which is like tying a whole bunch of radio telescopes together to act like a single dish. If they're all looking off at an angle, make sure I'm in the camera here. If you've got two dishes looking off at an angle like this, light coming in is going to hit one dish before it hits the second one. But because you can record the whole wave, you can rewind the further dish's signal in time so that the light would hit it at the same time. So you sync up those signals. And if you do that, after you record the signal, you can mathematically make those two dishes act like they're one dish pointed in the same direction. But you don't have to have two separate dishes to do that. Really, if you had like a cylinder, like say you cut a paper towel tube in half and just had a whole bunch of antennas along that, you could take the light that comes in from this way, bounces off the bottom of the cylinder, hits one antenna, bounces off a slightly different part of the cylinder, hits another antenna, bounces off a slightly different part of the cylinder, hits another antenna down along it. And as long as you had the right timings for all those antennas, you could make it act as if you had a whole bunch of dishes all pointing in the same direction with just this tube. But you don't have to do it just once, because you're recording the whole signal from each of those antennas. If you run those signals at like different sets of timings, you can actually make it seem like that tube, that whole set of antennas, is looking out in multiple directions at once, just by changing the relative timing of those signals. And so what chime does is it has 4 of these tubes all lined up next to each other that are looking north-south. And with that, it can actually act like it's looking at 1,024 different spots on the sky in this strip from north to south. And so they just have those antennas recording the signals, and then they throw it into those signals into a shipping container full of graphics processing cards. And there's a bank of cards for each set of timings. And so they filter out all the stuff that's not in the direction that bank is looking for. And so they can do really, really efficient radio surveys that way. As the Earth spins underneath, that strip goes over the whole sky. It's really fascinating work, and it's probably going to be how a lot of future radio telescopes are done, especially survey ones.
A lot of processing power there then.
Absolutely, yeah. This only really became possible with the advent of like modern graphics cards. They're sort of specialized for the exact type of mathematics that needs to happen for this work. Yeah, Lori mentioned that the DAO, the Dominion National Physical Observatory, did a lot of that work, a lot of that science to make that possible. So really, really a stellar example of Canadian astronomy.
Good explanation. Thank you.
Cool.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna ask the question. So in the chat, somebody was just saying, that their favorite planet is Tadmor. And can someone, and I don't want to specifically single out Dawn to say it, but can someone talk a little bit more about that planet? I had never heard of it before.
I have never heard about that. He imagined it, I think.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he says it's the one. Oh yeah, there. Go ahead, Don.
Come on.
Yeah. So I mentioned it because it was really a landmark piece of work. It was, I think, partly being cautious Canadians. They didn't outright claim it was the discovery of a planet, and in fact, they a few years after tentatively saying that they had found a planet, the first evidence of a planet around a star, they retracted the data, saying it wasn't good enough for them. But the techniques that they used in finding that planet were the basis of a great many of the first discoveries of planets going around other stars. And so, and the astronomers who use those techniques acknowledge the Canadians and their methods. So it's, I think it's such an important discovery, because it was really the first time that we were starting to get evidence of planets going around other stars.
This
And it's
planet
called
was found by.
Tadmor?
Nope.
Sorry, I was just wanted to interject. It's called Tadmor? Like, I thought it was just called like Gamma Cephei A or something.
Yeah, apparently it's Tadmor. So
Tadmor.
Never heard of that.
This planet was found by, or at least with help from Stevenson Yang at UVic, right?
that's
Yeah,
right.
he's super
Yeah.
cool.
Ruchi, Calvin, and I think all took a course from him at UVic.
That's right. Gordon Walker and Bruce Campbell as well. So yeah.
That's cool.
So
Thanks, Don.
and that device was actually tested before it was sent to CFHT. It was actually tested on the 1.2 meter at the DAO, and used hydrogen fluoride gas, molecular gas, and apparently they were quite worried because it was very poisonous, and they're afraid that the gas would leak out and kill everybody nearby. But and one of the advancements that other astronomers made was they found that they could use iodine gas instead, which was a lot easier to work with. So, but, yeah.
Good.
Wasn't that the technology where they, like our guys, didn't get kind of part of the Nobel Prize for some of the work they did?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a long history to it. Yeah.
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 Okay. Next question. This might be for Ruhi.
Oh, good for her.
And I might butcher this a little bit, but there's a term about stars being living dead stars. Are you familiar with that, and what does it mean? So I'm guessing from the look that no, but so I guess so. Just to, okay, so I guess stars have the ability to blow up more than once.
Yeah.
But it could actually be more than twice.
From what I think you're talking about, sometimes some stars, when they explode, they will implode, bounce back, and then fully explode. And then sometimes when we have like a white dwarf star, after it is already gone supernova and has died, can then take on mass from a nearby star, creating more mass. And then it gets to a special limit called the Chandrasekhar limit. It's like
1.4.
Yeah, 1.4 solar mass.
Solar mass, yeah.
And then once it gets to that limit, it will then go supernova again and explode.
What causes the bounce back? Why would it? What?
So I have to like remember my classes. So when it's imploding, the forces inside make it try to go back, and then it'll explode. anyone can jump in, but yeah.
Yeah. Rishi's right that like a white dwarf can go through cycles of novae, where it pulls off material from a nearby star and flash fuses, or it can go supernova, in which case the star is usually destroyed. What I think this questioner may be talking about, I did a quick Google, and it turns out that just recently discovered was a star that actually did go supernova twice in a nearby galaxy. I've posted a link to it in the, I accidentally sent it just to Ruhi. Let me post it generally. Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery. Basically, it went supernova and then like went through 4 cycles of brightening. And then there was another supernova in the exact same spot in the sky about 60 years ago as well. So we don't know for sure why this might be. It could be just a really large type of star called a Wolf-Rayet star, which I think the folks in the electronically assisted astronomy thing are going to be talking about a little bit. But basically, this is a star that's so big that it's trying to explode while it's still forming. So it could be that this was just in an interesting like position where it like went supernova and then was still in a pocket of rich enough gas that it was able to build up enough material to go supernova again. But we're still really not sure yet.
Aaron,
Aaron,
I wonder if that would be like a type 2 supernova, because a type 1 would be everything just detonates and everything really blows up. But
it would
in
have
the
to
second,
be, yeah.
So this in the second type, it's a star that's kind of run out of fuel and it starts to collapse on itself. And at that point, I guess there'd be remnant there. So I guess it could go through the same kind of cycle and get hooked up with another companion star and start accreting and getting gas, and then finally blow up completely.
It could be the result of a collision between like a stellar remnant and another star, but yeah, this one's at least 50 times more massive than the sun.
If it's 50 times mass, it will turn into a black hole.
Not quite. So I just found a more detailed article. This one says that it may be the first, oh gosh, where was that paragraph? Oh yeah, the earlier explosion in 1954 provided an important clue suggesting that the star could be the first example of a pulsational pair instability supernova. Basically that the core becomes so hot that part of it turns into antimatter, or that there are gamma rays in it that produce matter-antimatter pairs, and it sort of blows itself up from the inside that way, but it doesn't turn into a stellar remnant like a black hole. So if this was a big enough star, then you could have this pair production happen. It blows itself up a little bit, like gives off a supernova, but then collapses back and still has enough material that it becomes a star that would undergo like a normal type 2 supernova or something. Yes. This causes an explosion that blows off the star's outer layers and leaves the core intact. Such a process can repeat over decades before the final explosion and subsequent collapse to a black hole. Yeah, so you could get this, it's sort of like a nova type thing on a white dwarf, where it accretes matter until it can fuse the hydrogen on the surface, creating a nova. But in this case, you're sort of blowing up from the inside, but not quite enough to throw the star to bits.
In the case of the nova, it's not what they say is cataclysmic, so it doesn't destroy itself. It's just kind of like it catches on fire, like it grabs a bunch of gas from the companion star, and then that just catches on fire and kind of gets really bright, but then it dies down, and then it has the opportunity to do that again. So if it grabs more material, it can do it again. And then, of course, it could eventually reach the state where it totally runs out of fuel, and it gets so heavy, it collapses on itself.
Yeah, early stage, it has to have a companion then?
Yeah, well, I think these all are associated with dwarves and companion stars.
Mhm.
Yeah,
As
the
far as I
novae are
understand.
for sure, because it has to collect material onto the surface in order to go nova.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the fact that this is a pair production supernova and it is not cataclysmic, like anything that involves that much antimatter really should be cataclysmic.
Thanks for
But
your help.
no problem. That sounded
Yeah.
like a cool rabbit hole.
Yeah. Okay, I have one last question from YouTube, which is, every few years, of course, we hear about the possibility of a planet beyond the planet formerly known as Pluto. Why can't we seem to pin it down? Like,
It is very difficult to do that. We assume that there is a planet 9 somewhere, but there is a lot of views about it. That probably it's not a unseen planet, but still there's a lot of research being done, and there's potential we may find this planet eventually. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, Pluto is still called Pluto.
Yeah.
It's not formally known
yeah,
as Pluto.
it's formerly known as a planet. That's my point.
Oh,
Yes.
that's right. Yeah.
I'm not dead.
It's still there.
It's still there. Mhm.
Also with trans-Neptunian objects, they're just so far from the sun that they're normally going to be quite cold. So they're not going to give off a lot of infrared light, which would make it really easy to see. Also, we think that this thing is out in the Kuiper belt. So there's the belt of just like asteroids and possible comets around, like past or in kind of the orbit of Pluto as well, and past. It's really dark, it's really cold, and I think it came from some Caltech scientists doing a simulation on why a few of these objects had a strange orbit. Yeah, and I think, and they just made a simulation and it was like, oh yeah, it's mathematically possible, but it's cold, it's dark, and things move really slowly out there. The further you are from the sun, the slower you're going to move. So even if we keep telescopes pointed out there for a really long time, it's hard to see a significant shift in position than, let's say, if we pointed it at something, a closer planet like Venus or even Jupiter.
Thank you. And thank you both for being on the panel tonight. Great answers. And so, as always, my last question goes to David, which is, David, can you tell us about the anatomy of a supernova?
Well, it's wonderful that you guys covered off nova and supernova. So my whole intro is gone now. but no, I say that jokingly. So 2 weeks ago, we covered off nova, right? So we talked about this concept of a binary system where you have a white dwarf and then a nearby companion, right? So what would happen is through their gravitational relationship, the white dwarf being so dense would be potentially grabbing fuel off of the nearby companion, right? And as we mentioned in this earlier part in the Ask the Astronomers, that could light on fire. It could cause it to be brightened. Now it may do that until it runs out of fuel again, and then again it goes through a cycle of accretion and sort of gathering gas and brightening again. Now, this week we want to talk about the more cataclysmic event where a relationship like that goes supernova. So in other words, it could happen in a couple of different ways. There appear to be like two different types of supernova. Like in type 1, it can just blow to bits. So basically it's a product of thermal runaway. So when it gets its explosion, it can't stop, it just keeps going and totally demolishes itself. But in the type 2 situation, it's basically the star kind of running out of fuel, and then through the action of gravity, it compresses and becomes really small. And I think it turns into like a neutron star or something like that. So we're going to see a couple of examples of that tonight, and this kind of came from two things. I think Dave reminded me that we were probably going to talk about supernova this week. So yes, we are going to do that. And the other thing that this arose from is Dave was playing around with some of his images, and he was kind of removing stars from them and realizing there was some kind of structure involved there. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave, and he's going to tell us a little bit about what his thinking process was.
Sure. I unmuted there.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So I'm just going to share my screen, because when I found out the topic was supernova, I always wanted to photograph something called the Veil Nebulae, which I understood were supernova remnants. So I programmed the telescope to take some pictures of that, and I'm going to share with you some of the things on my voyage of discovery here that I found out when I was taking pictures of it. Screen. So this is the area of the supernova remnant known as, I knew as, the Eastern and Western Veil. The Western Veil is the one in the east for some reason, and is this little object here, which has been photographed many times, and people show very nice pictures of it. And then the Eastern Veil, which is the other part, is this creepy looking face nebular structure on this side. So I took this picture and put it together, and the one thing that struck me was the star field in this part of the sky. So all the dots that you can see on this image are stars in the Milky Way, and we're looking pretty much directly into the Milky Way and in the constellation Cygnus. And it's actually very pretty. There's nice blue stars and white stars and red stars and yellow stars all in there, and makes a nice picture. But there's so many stars that it kind of obscures the view of all this supernova remnant that I was supposedly looking at. That kind of appears red, and some tendrils are red and some tendrils are blue-green. Well, I'm trying to relate this on a simple guy, and I'm trying to think of some explosion taking place associated with a supernova, and why would I end up with like a patch over here and a patch way over here? Hopefully you can see my cursor, and then little patches here and there of what was going on. So I didn't really understand what it was I was looking at. So I took another image, and the second image I took, I happened to use some filters in front of my camera. So filters in between the camera and the telescope. And what these filters are is they actually hone in on the frequency or the wavelength of the light given off by these gases that show up in red and blue here. And they respond to those by taking in most of the photons that are emitted by those gases, the spectral lines that are emitted by those gases. But they only take a small portion of the spectrum that's emitted by the stars. So the net effect when you take a picture of that is it reduces the stars. So this next image is the result of that. And you can see with this image that the gases, the nebulosity, the supernova remnants are actually much brighter and the stars are much dimmer. And I got kind of interested because I can start to see a little bit of structure. It's still kind of vague and there's still a lot of stars. The stars are definitely smaller and dimmer, but I can get to see a lot more. But that was kind of the limits I could get to with by using filters. So another toolkit we have is actually to use some photo processing techniques that will hone in on the stars themselves, anything small and circular, and make them smaller and make them dimmer. So I went, and it's kind of frowned upon because it's kind of making up a picture. But I went and did it anyways, just so I could see what was going on. So here's what I saw when I dimmed the stars further. So now the supernova remnants were the brightest things you saw, and the stars kind of went, except for the bigger ones, went way into the background. And what I saw, I thought, was the structure that kind of explained an explosion taking place. And I don't know if you can use your imagination, like if you say you're cutting a round orange. Now you would think an explosion would make a sphere and it would be basically round. But if you can imagine taking an orange, putting it on a cutting block, or a mango, you actually do this too. And let's cut off two ends of the orange. And what you would end up with is two arcs of the orange. And in the middle, what you'd be left behind with is a band. And that's kind of what I thought I saw here was, here is, if you can follow my cursor, here's the band of the orange in the middle. And here's one of the arcs on one of the ends of the orange. And here's the other arcs on the other end of the orange. So roughly, if you put these pieces back together, you would get a circle. And somewhere in the middle here, you'd expect to see the origin of the supernova itself. So I'll just show you, having found this, and then once I saw this, I couldn't unsee it. So I went to the NASA website to see if they had actually mapped this, because they're much smarter than I am. But if you look on the left-hand side, you can see that creepy looking face structure. You can also see the bound, which is that center part of the orange or whatever. And then you can see the other side of that cut off orange. And you can see the overall structure is indeed spherical, as if an explosion had taken place in the middle. And they reckon that this is the middle of where that explosion was. So that was very gratifying to figure out that, hey, these aren't just random chunks of gas and really explained. So it was a bit of an investigation that we could take through with photography, and figure out what is the structure of something by taking various photographs and processing it. So I found that very interesting and wanted to share it with you. The final image that I created was using those narrow banded filters. I wanted to mimic the original colors as best as possible, but I didn't want all those big stars. And this is the image that I finally came up with. Now, that's the very analytical sort of approach to looking at this image, but hope to show you in a few more images when we zoom into these various areas, is actually an area of tremendous beauty. You see twining of one gas that's giving off red light, and that's mainly hydrogen, and other gases that are giving off blue and green lights. That's primarily oxygen. But and there's distinct regions of both those gases. So that's enough out of me. I think Dave's going to show you some of the honed in on this supernova remnant. So this was the result of the supernova remnant. I think it took place, they figure, 5,000 to 8,000 years ago. It's actually very large in the sky. It's about 5 or 6 full moons across. And you can see it in binoculars or a small telescope, but it has to be very dark, or you need to use one of those narrowband filters on your lens or in your telescope to see it.
Well, that's great. Thanks, Dave, for that.
I
Normally,
have a
the Eastern.
question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Sid.
Yeah. What's the estimated distance of this nebula?
You know,
It's
distance.
about 1,900 light years away.
19. So it's quite recent.
Yeah, they say it's the estimates are between 5,000 and 8,000 years ago.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
normally
dinosaurs saw a big bright. Well, I guess it wouldn't be it would be post dinosaurs.
Well, the
normally.
dinosaurs died
Oh,
long time
Dorothy,
ago.
Dorothy, did you have a question?
Oh, I just wanted to make a comment, or for Dave Payne, that if you look up at the sky, straight up at the sky, images are the stars to the west, or to your left, the stars to the east are to your right, because that's the direction the sky is moving, from right to left. So that's why star maps have, from Earth maps, flipped orientation, but it's right in line with what you see if you think of us as being in a sphere and we're looking up, not on the horizontal plane, but looking up at the sky.
Yes.
Another way of thinking of it is think of lying down on your back on a map rather than looking straight down on top of it. East and west flip directions if your head is still north.
Yeah, you hold the map up over your head.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, but yeah, I think you just do it to confuse me.
Great, thanks, Dave.
Let's talk to geometry.
I was just gonna say, normally a lot of people just photograph the west or the east, so it's not that common just to see both in the view. So thank you for that. That's a nice. It's a different view.
It's also been measured by the Hubble Space Telescope. The first time they imaged it versus very recently, they've actually been able to see the actual change in its size, so they can actually measure the velocity that it's moving outward.
Well, just over a few years then.
Yeah, I think it's 15 years that they've had images of it. So
Right.
Yeah, they recently did some reprocessing. I wasn't sure if Ruhi was going to dig that up for us, but I know there were a couple of articles where they reprocessed everything, and actually the image that you showed, Dave, that was bluish, that was part of that article.
Okay. Well, if there's any blurring that you see, that's because I took it over 2 nights. So it might have moved in between.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so Dave, if you, oh, there you go. Thank you. So here's some more images. Now, this is the series that Dave showed you here. Let me just move this aside here. Some of the details Dave was telling you about are actually very interesting, as he mentioned. This is Pickering's triangle. So I think that's this section right here. Is it, Dave?
That's right.
Yeah, so let's have a closer look at that. So yeah, it's pretty nice. Ruhi, I wonder if you could comment on the filamentary structure here. This has always intrigued me, these filaments.
Yeah, for sure. So what's really interesting about this supernova remnant is because it was so big that it basically released a massive shock wave or bubble. And so you're getting these, you're getting this structure as the basically the remnants of the supernova is hitting the interstellar medium. And it's compressing and heating up the gases from the remnant, which is actually what we're seeing here is the structure of the medium. So that's what astronomers have now been using to see the interstellar medium. This specific remnant is really special because of that. It's really interesting.
Ruhi, how do you explain the difference in coloration?
Normally, I don't have anything on the specific color. I just know that, I don't know if it's not for the Pickering triangle, but for like the center of the veil, there is the blueness in the center is definitely it's a jet from the initial explosion that is just catching up with the rest of basically the shock wave. So it's called an interstellar bullet. And it's just going so fast. And it's, I believe the blues and the red are sometimes based off of the filters that they use. But yeah.
But the blue is showing one gas, and the red is showing a different gas. So are the gases moving at different speeds?
They can be, but normally when you have a filter, blue or green are usually used for oxygen, sometimes red for hydrogen. It changes depending on the filter. I'm not completely sure with this one.
Do you remember what filters you use for this, Dave?
Yeah, so, well, this one we're looking at, I used sulfur and hydrogen and oxygen filters.
And how did you map the colors?
This one was sulfur was red, hydrogen was green, and oxygen was blue.
Okay.
So, you know, it strikes me that there's actually a separation of the gases taking place.
Oh, you mean this kind of stratification?
Yeah.
Right here?
So there are oxygen-rich areas and hydrogen-rich areas, or sulfur-rich areas. So it's like they're either they're sailing on the solar wind differently, or they're impacted by the medium differently, or something. Causing that separation.
Well, gases are going to be ionized differently dependent on how compressed or how hot they are. So, and sulfur is also twice as heavy as oxygen. That means they could be possibly traveling at different speeds as well.
Okay. Dan, did you want to talk about any of the photos that came from the Plaskett that are related to this?
Sure, we just have one quick shot on the veil. So that's down at the bottom there, and I think we can start there.
Okay.
So for this one, unlike the beautiful images that Dave was able to present, this is a single frame. And that's just the nature sometimes of using the Plaskett, is that it's a great big light bucket, which means that I can get away with cheating a little bit and giving you the true EAA experience of cracking one frame and then having it come out looking quite nice. I believe that this one was in green. So I was using what's called a Sloan Digital Sky Survey filter set, and they split off from the ultraviolet all the way down to the infrared, but I was using G prime for this image. So you're seeing a blend of oxygen and maybe just the barest hint of some hydrogen, but probably not. It's likely going to be oxygen and a few other elements in there. And again, with this one, a few of the common features are just as filamentary structures. We're shooting under the lights of Victoria, and it wasn't a narrowband filter, so I wasn't able to go quite so deep on this one. But if you do have a chance to come up during future public nights, this is the kind of thing that you might be able to see as a one-off during the public observing sessions. But this isn't the only trick in the bag, and the plastic can also do color when you give us a little bit of time and put some pictures together. So unlike on the public nights, we can go into a couple of the other ones. Maybe quickly to the crab, David, which is another supernova remnant. And before I launch in onto the boring telescope stuff, Ruhi, do you want to kind of give a bit of an intro or chat about what the crab is and why it's such an exciting object?
So the crab is another, again, supernova remnant. It was actually found by Chinese astronomers a long time ago, and they called it a guest star. So they just saw it in the sky for a little bit, and then it faded away, and they recorded it, and it was one of the earliest known recordings of a supernova in our history. What's really interesting about this, can't really tell because there are a lot of stars. But there are two faint stars in the middle of this remnant. One of them is a neutron star that is, it's a spinning neutron star. So it's every second it's giving around 30 pulses. And then the star that actually caused this remnant would be the other faint star in the middle, somewhere in there. And we believe that it was probably a type 1A star. No, yes, I was thinking. No, not type 1A, maybe type 1B. But I'm not too sure about the second one. I wasn't able to find out a lot about it, but the pulsar was definitely the most studied thing in the Crab Nebula. But it is also very beautiful, and you can see it even with a smaller telescope, sometimes binoculars. Yeah.
And if I remember correctly, that pulsar was the first pulsar ever detected,
Yes.
which is another thing that makes the crab something to stare at. I think that over the last 60 or so years since they found it, it's been shown to be more accurate than our most accurate clocks if you were to try and measure time off of it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that requires a lot of money to do, but you could if you're really enthusiastic. So a little bit about the technical side of capturing this one. You're getting everybody who's still here a bit of a crash course into false color imaging. I mentioned I was using Sloan Digital Sky Survey filters, and for this one you'll notice that those really lovely filamentary structures here are lime green, and that might seem a bit odd to you, and that's okay, it is a bit odd. The reason for that is that when taking data on this, I couldn't use blue because at our altitude, we just don't get enough ultraviolet down through the atmosphere to make it really a useful filter. So I shot through G prime, R prime, and I prime, which is green, red, some green, a little bit of blue, red, and near infrared. And then I still had to map back with the green filter into blue, the red filter into green, and the infrared filter into red, which is why all of these structures here that are normally red in every image that you see of the crab are lime green. And it's just because that's where it's giving off a lot of that detailed light. But you can't always get away from the filters that you have in front of your camera. And the reason why we use those filters, if anybody's wondering, is exactly this. The camera's black and white, it's monochrome, it doesn't see color all on its own. It's just, if you left it open, it would catch every type of wavelength it's sensitive to. And so the filters allow you to narrow in on different areas of the light signature from whatever object you might be looking at that could be interesting to your scientific question. I didn't have a scientific question taking this, I just wanted to make a pretty picture to show off to the public. So I guess mission accomplished, or I hope. But David, maybe we could pop to the fireworks galaxy quickly. And why don't we go to the Plaskett one first? So this is the second one of the two. Okay, I guess we can start here.
Oh, did you want to go to the other one?
Yeah, please, if you could.
You need to help me with.
One row up and then one to the left. There you go.
Right.
Okay. Before I get too excited about the fireworks galaxy, Ruhi, do you have anything you want to say on this? I don't want to dive in too early.
I don't also want to take anything you want to say away. But this one's really cool. So we have seen about 10 supernovae in the fireworks galaxy, hence its name is fireworks. Things are exploding in it all the time. It also, so just to put it in perspective, the Milky Way galaxy has about twice the amount of stars as the fireworks galaxy. But the fireworks galaxy has about 10 times as many more supernovae exploding, which makes it a really interesting topic. But I think the ones that I wrote down, like the two more interesting supernovae, was the one that happened in 2009. One of the stars flared up about 100 times the luminosity of the sun, and then rapidly went back and disappeared. And then the Hubble Space Telescope showed that the death of the star created a possible black hole, because when we were actually looking for most of the remnant or the mass of the star afterwards, it was missing. So there is a possible black hole where this star exploded, making it a type 2 supernova. And then also, we also think that this star was a possible yellow hypergiant, which is a new kind of type of star for me. It was really interesting to kind of go down that rabbit hole as well. And then there is something called the red eclipse, as you can see actually in this picture, which we think is a possible large supernova remnant as well, but it's not completely proven. And then we do know there is a possible interacting dwarf galaxy that is superimposed onto the fireworks galaxy as well.
I don't have quite so many facts, so I guess that I'll start out with my more subtle facts. In this one, I was using the same filter set, but there's something really cool going on here, which is that the fireworks galaxy and all the stars in a galaxy, more or less, when you look at it, act like what are called black body emitters. In other words, if you were to heat them up, they emit a rainbow or a spectrum of light. And so through those same filters, I was able to successfully map this into an image like we would normally expect to see. And you'll notice that the entire galaxy is quite purple. And it's a bit uncommon. If you take a look at a lot of the galaxies that are out there in the night sky, they tend to have this very striking blue and then a very rich yellow contrast between the older stars that are often found toward the core of the central bulge, and then the stars in the outer arms that tend to be a bit younger. This one, the red that you're seeing, is from our own galaxy. And I think that might be a good point to transition on to the next image, because what's happening is that we're looking through one of the arms of our own galaxy, and the dust in our galaxy and the other matter in between is creating a bit of a redshift in the entire thing, turning it all purple. And when we look at the next image here, you'll see just how many stars there are in the field as we look out. And we're talking about supernovas tonight. And the fireworks galaxy gets its name for a reason, which is that, as Ruhi pointed out, it's popping off at a rate that we don't really have in many other galaxies that we look at. But you'll see there in the little cutout, this is from a much smaller telescope, but there's this one bright dot. It looks like any other star that we see, and this is SN 2017 AEW. But what that really means is that if you look at every single star in the picture, every single one of them, except for that one dot, is in our galaxy. Only that supernova is the only thing that we can see that looks anything like a star, including anything in the last image as well, that would be in the fireworks galaxy. And so when these things detonate, there's such a cataclysmic explosion that they're bright to the level that you can see them in your own little backyard telescope. This is a personal 3.5-inch refractor. It's nothing too special, but you're still able to pick up the light from one of these explosions in real time as it's happening. And this is one of the ways that we actually can detect and measure the distances to other objects out in the galaxy, depending on the type of supernova. I think it's the 1As that are the white dwarfs. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
So 1As are function as what we call standard candles, where once they creep mass, they always detonate at more or less the same Chandrasekhar limit, which is about 1.44 solar masses. Based on that, we always know how massive they are when they blow, which means that we can more or less measure out the distance to them, because if you know how bright something is in absolute terms, you know how far away it is by how bright you measure it. And so I don't remember what the type was on this one, and I can't remember if the name would tell me, but it's incredible to think of how much energy there is going on in any one of these, that you're able to see them from halfway across the universe. And I have one very quick final thought on that, which is hanging around with some of the very experienced and amazing telescope operators up at the Plaskett. I learned about a project that one of them, Dave Whalen, was working on out of Hawaii. And in it, they used these supernovas in much more distant galaxies, about half the look-back time of the universe, to show the proofs of relativity, because when you're looking back that far, the actual explosion itself also takes longer because of the galactic expansion or universal expansion that's going on at the same time. So you get some really interesting things on the cosmological scale when you look at objects like this, and they're pretty much the only thing out there that's bright enough that you can see it. So a lot of very fascinating science is done based off of not just the remnants of supernova, but the actual action of the explosion itself. That's it.
great.
I tapped out my facts.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So I think the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at a few things. I'm going to start with Dave Payne's picture of the crescent, two of his, the crescent, and then we're going to end with Brock's, and we're going to talk a little bit about the nebula itself. Now, the nebula here, the crescent nebula, this is actually very close to the star Satyr in the constellation Cygnus. So if you think of the constellation, the central portion of the constellation is a star called Satyr, and not too far from there is this nebula. Now, this doesn't fit into the story of supernova remnant, but this is kind of like a supernova about to be. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And Dave, you had another image of this as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about this one, Dave?
Yeah, that's again an attempt at this time. I used a canned program to artificial intelligence to remove the stars completely, which kind of gives us sort of serene look to it. But again, what people saw and how it got its name, how this nebula got its name, is generally the only thing that you can see readily is this outer edge of the nebula. So it looks like a crescent.
Mm-hmm.
But when you take long exposures, you can see it actually has a kind of asymmetric spheroid shape to it in reality.
Yeah, it kind of looks like a sponge or maybe like a crab, actually.
Yeah,
not to conflict with M1, of course.
Well, it does have that resemblance both to the Veil nebulas that we looked at, and it does have a bit of resemblance to the crab in that you've got these filaments. Like it looks like it's made of almost like a net or a network of gases. And the other thing, it's a little subtle in this particular picture. You can really see it in Brock's, is that the entire thing seems to be encased by this blue nebulosity reflecting oxygen. So again, you've got distinct areas where one gas is at a different place than another gas, and you know, it's somehow a cousin to those supernova remnants, although it's not created by a supernova, this one.
So, okay, so let's move on to Brock's image. So what's so interesting? Actually, I'll let you talk about this one first, Brock, and then we'll talk about some interesting features.
Yeah, this one is primarily just taken with oxygen and hydrogen alpha. And I especially wanted, I think I even put extra time on the oxygen because I really wanted to get lots of data on it. It's such a wispy sort of teal, yeah, and there's some
all around here actually.
And also in this kind of up in on the main surface of it, there's kind of almost looks like a bubble sort of kind of to the left, right about where your mouse is, a little bit further in. There's kind of a, I don't know. Yeah, that right there. That's a neat, there's some really neat filaments and looks like that little bulgy area there. So, but yeah, I find it interesting that the oxygen is, it looks like it's out ahead of the hydrogen. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's just the fact that it's heavier and it's less impeded by the, all the other gas, the fine particles in space of other gases that it has to bounce off as it moves outward. But it's really an interesting combination.
To me, I saw a similar thing in that that triangle picture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the when I started looking at this
Pickering's triangle.
Yeah, Pickering's, yeah. The other thing I thought about was I wondered if there was anything interesting about this object. So when I actually Googled the Crescent Nebula, they actually talked about the fact that this contains a Wolf-Rayet star. And in fact, it could be sort of in the future turn into a supernova. And in fact, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about that, Ruhi. Did you get a chance to check that out?
I did.
Oh, excellent. Thank you. Here's the Wolf-Rayet right here. This is
Yeah.
WR136.
Yes. So a Wolf-Rayet star, just in general, are some of the more hotter or the hottest stars out there, as well as the most luminous. This one specifically is about 4.7 million years old. So it's about at the end of its life. So I don't know when it'll go supernova, but it will go supernova somewhat soon in astronomical terms. But what's really cool about the Crescent Nebula is that when the Wolf-Rayet star actually it changed into a red supergiant, it actually ejected part of its shell. And so that's been like slowly moving outwards.
Is that what we're seeing here, Ruhi?
Yeah. So we're seeing
okay.
the shell of this star slowly moving outwards, but we're also seeing the extremely fast stellar wind from the Wolf-Rayet star now actually ionizing and catching up with the shell of its old self, really, and causing this kind of crescent shape and kind of turning it into a bubble, almost like the veil.
Can you comment on the separate colors? Because I know both Dave and Brock talk about this kind of teal bubble or shell around this whole thing. Is that of note?
So Wolf-Rayet stars normally don't have any hydrogen in them. It's mostly ionized helium, ionized oxygen, and no, not oxygen, helium, nitrogen, and carbon. So that's probably what we are seeing.
Actually,
now.
That just reminds me, Ruhi.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me, I picked up a spectra of the star. Well, I don't know if this is going to tell us anything.
That's- Oh.
It's pointing to a lot of different kind of elements or parts
Yeah.
of the spectrum.
Most of it's helium and nitrogen.
It would appear so, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't think so. Yeah, but no hydrogen, which is good. You know, it's
So those Roman numerals are just the ionized state. So
Yep.
you see lots of ionized states of helium and nitrogen.
yeah, this is definitely all ionized gas.
Interesting. I've been meaning, I wanted to take a spectra of this before, but weather did not prevail. But I was glad I was able to find this on the internet.
Yeah, I believe the ultraviolet rays from the wolframite right now is actually that's what's causing the shell to actually glow. Mhm.
Very cool. So I'm just wondering if the audience has any questions about what they've seen tonight or about any of these images. Oh yeah, here's the, I went into the sky to find out exactly where it was in the crescent. So it is that star right there. Okay, if there are no other questions.
Could I just make
what?
a comment there?
Yeah, absolutely.
I very much enjoyed the discussion of the crescent because that's one of my favorites, one of many favorites to look at from a really dark site where it does look like a very nice crescent. And now that I understand that this is flipped left, right, or actually maybe rotated as well. But anyway, the crescent is full, center part is to the west in the sky. And it's a beautiful structure. And I've often wondered and I knew there was some magnificent Wolf-Rayet star associated with it, but I never understood. I mean, I hadn't looked in to try to understand how it could look that way. And it's a beautiful object. Any visual astronomer, get to a dark site and put your telescope on it. It's wonderful. So thanks.
Yeah, but Dorothy, you're actually a really good person to ask this. How would you describe the visual view through your large telescopes of this? Because Dave was saying how you can see how people would probably mostly see this area here. Right?
That's right. That's what you see, that bright curve, but it's a beautiful shape sort of when you put it into grayscale. And dim it, I guess, you get rid of the colors. It's just, it's a beautiful, delicate, and I guess I like non-symmetrical things. So the fact that it isn't like a half a perfect circle makes it more interesting than if it were, for example. So it's just lovely to see. And there's so many stars in Cygnus that it's maybe a little more of a challenge to find if you have to have the right low power to find it, and then you can go up. But my 15-inch telescope is no longer considered large. It's pretty small. If the star parties had been going on this summer, there would be amateurs going out with medium size 20 to 40-inch telescopes, and a few of them larger, some of them homemade. So, but it's definitely worth looking at if you have a really dark site or not so dark and a larger telescope.
Great.
Just
Thanks for that perception. With
your eyes, get the photons right into your brain, so to speak.
May I ask Ruhi a question?
Sure.
Yeah.
Ruhi, I may have missed it somewhere, but why is it red on the ends again?
So the colors matter on what filters they're using.
Okay, well, so why are they the same things on the edges? Is it again something that's blowing out?
Yes. So again, it was So the Wolf-Rayet star, when it went red supergiant, blew the outer shell of itself. And so that's been traveling slowly outwards. And now the Wolf-Rayet star now has an extremely fast stellar wind that is catching up to the shell and is starting to ionize it and create this bubble kind of shape. And also the UV rays from the star right now are then giving it the glow that you see as well.
Okay, thank you.
No worries. Also, I forgot to add that that this star has a possible binary system. They think there is a low mass star orbiting it every 5 days, possible K or M spectral class.
Oh, very cool. Okay, well,
question, sorry,
yeah,
but
go ahead.
Just a question following that up. Could the fact that it's a double star influence the shape of the shell? Sort of thinking back to Laurie's question as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry to just jump in here, but yeah, there are a bunch of examples like we see in planetary nebula systems. If there's a secondary star, it can affect the shape of the resulting nebula. Since this was probably like one event, it may not have changed things that much unless the star had like a equatorial bulge or something maybe. But what may also be happening is these larger stars, for whatever reason, tend to end up moving pretty fast. Like this one, to be in a region where, like, because it's very, very young and it wouldn't get that old. So to be in a region where it's like able to shoot stuff out into an interstellar medium that's not completely obscuring it because it's still in the middle of a star-forming nebula, that to me says it's probably moving quite fast. So what may be causing that oblong shape, that compression along one axis, is that it's sort of ramming through the interstellar medium as it's blowing the stuff off. So the stuff ahead of it is getting compressed closer to the star. Oop, cat. The stuff behind it doesn't hit the interstellar medium as hard because it's moving away. It doesn't glow as much, and then out to the sides, it can go a bit farther. And then, Calvin and Amy are posting in the chat that as well, the reason you see that on either long end, the two caps along the long axis is because you're seeing more material piled up along the line of view, like looking at the edge of a bubble.
Bill Weir said
here,
that,
yeah.
by the way. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was thinking my question wasn't well stated, that that the shape that having two stars orbiting each other quite rapidly, I understand that might influence the shape of the winds going out to push the gas out, and so it was the difference between one star, a single star, and a double would influence the shape of the nebula. Is that plausible or a ridiculous thought?
It's plausible, but I think the outflow would have to be over a longer period. Like with a planetary nebula where there's like pulsations and like a long period of outflow that creates that nebula, you can definitely get a binary companion shaping it. But it sounds like this outflow that we're seeing was the result of a single, fairly short-term event. So I don't, unless that binary was extremely close, such that it completed several orbits over the time scale of the eruption, then I wouldn't expect it to have much of an effect on the overall shape. I would think the motion of the star relative to the interstellar medium would have a greater effect on the overall shape of the nebula.
So it would be interesting to map, and I don't know if we've done this, Rudy. Can you tell, like, for a typical star in this picture, is there a database that has how far away it is?
I'm sure there is. Yeah.
Can you tell which stars are in front of this? Which stars are in the middle of it? And which ones are behind it?
There are definitely probably a database for all of these stars. You
I'm
can
sure.
tell by the radial velocity how far away or how close they are to us, so we can see which stars are in the foreground or in the background. There are massive databases that I cannot remember the name of right now, that if you just put in this specific object, you will also, and you take the RA index and you just input that as well, you'll be able to find stars that are close to it or around it. So you'll be able
You might even be able to produce like a 3D model.
yeah, exactly.
Because each of these stars is also generating its own wind, right?
Yes.
Which will be pushing this gas hitherto and fro, right?
If
That
they
would
were,
be the interstellar medium.
yeah.
Yeah.
Would this be in the Gaia database? Is this the direction, the bit of sky that Gaia's mapped?
Well, it's a huge database. I don't know if it
It's
focuses in
huge,
this
and
area.
anyone
Yeah.
can go in. And I
Yep.
mean, I learned something about it by looking it up and there happened to be a question, pretty good question from someone who was trying to actually use it, and asked the question. Well, it was answered clearly. This is for the rank beginner, not an astronomer. So it's I haven't gotten back to it, but it's a fun database to look at if that's what you're interested in.
Right.
You got everything you want to know.
Well, I've always I spent my career on the flow of fluids, so it does interest me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
David,
well,
Yes.
could you please enlarge it slowly and center the primary star in the middle? Slowly. Yeah, now stop there. I see a big hole to the left of it.
Well, there's some
Is that-
gaps here as well.
Is the gas in between?
Foreground gas, maybe?
Foreground?
I don't know.
or is-
I don't know if that's I don't know if it's a cosmetic defect. I'll have to ask Brock.
It's not. It's actually, I've seen that feature. I had the same thought, and I remember looking it up.
Is it in my picture too?
It's in the number of
I don't know.
pictures.
Let's have a look.
I think it is.
Yeah, it is right there. There it is.
there.
Look at that.
So we are looking right through it, yeah, in a way, unless there is a intermediate dust.
It might be a dark gas,
Nebula.
nebular gas, and it's blocking. Not sure.
Huh, interesting.
Could we,
Yeah, that's
could
the
we look
first
from
that's the first thing I thought of, Brock. You know, I thought it just was a defect, but obviously not.
Well, I saw it, and then I went and found other images and saw it in numerous ones, and went, okay, it's not.
It will be nice if you could rotate that and see whether.
If only we could look at this from a different angle.
Yeah.
Oh, no problem.
Well, if we do know the distance of all the stars, and we could simply then put in a 3D and rotate it and see if the hole is still there.
Well, we would have to find the distance to the dust itself to
Right.
know where it is.
Every piece of dust in the whole thing.
That would break your computer.
It's the most beautiful, beautiful image.
Yeah. No, this has actually been a great session. And again, like I always say, I learned something from every one of these sessions. If there aren't any other questions, I'd invite you to, in 2 weeks, we're going to have a star party that is nothing but astrophotography. So we're going to go over some of the basic modern techniques for us to do pictures. So we're going to let you in on some of the secrets that Dave and Brock use for creating the images. And I'm also planning on having a lunar photographer as well, and probably our youngest member as well, Nathan. He hasn't replied yet, but he does amazing things with an iPhone. So anyways, I invite you to join us 2 weeks from now.
All right. And I think that does it for this star party. So I guess we'll say
Yeah.
goodbye and good night.
Yeah, good images.
Thanks everyone for
Good night.
attending, for joining us. If you are still watching us on YouTube, please like and subscribe.
Yes, please. That would be cool.
And the recording of this talk will be, or this whole event will be available on YouTube later. So you can take a look again at it or share it out to your friends.
Yeah, in addition to past ones as well. We got them up there.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you.
Have a great night. Clear skies, everyone.
Yep.
Good night.
See you
Thanks,
next
everybody.
next
Night.
Star Party.
Thank you. So that's August the 21st.
All right.
Good night.
Night.